Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew, chapter 25, beginning at verse 14. For the kingdom of heaven is as if a man going on a journey summoned his slaves and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, to another 1, to each according to his ability. Then he went away. You've got it. The one to come up here. The one who had received the 5 talents went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. In the same way, the one who had the 2 talents made 2 more talents. But the one who had received the 1 talent went off and dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those slaves came and settled accounts with them. Then the one who had received the 5 talents came forward, bringing 5 more talents, saying, Master, you handed over to me 5 talents. See, I've made 5 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You've been trustworthy in a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. And the one with the 2 talents also came forward, saying, Master, you handed over to me 2 talents. See, I've made 2 more talents. His master said to him, Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You have been trustworthy in a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Then the one who had received the 1 talent also came forward, saying, Master, I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. But his master replied, You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter? Then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was my own with interest. So take the talent from him and give it to the one with the 10 talents. For to all those who have more will be given, and those who have in abundance will have an abundance. But from those who have nothing, even what they have will be taken away. As for this worthless slave, throw him into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. This is the gospel of Christ. Have you ever come home late at night and found that the door was locked? It's dark, it's cold, and for some reason you don't have a key. Anyone ever been locked out of where you think you should be? Yeah?
We had to go to the neighbours to come and lock the door, and then we had to ring a locksmith.
Oh, right, quite a drama.
All I did was went out to the rubbish bin.
It's not a nice feeling, is it?
No.
To not be where you should be or where you think you should be. Well, this parable and the one we looked at last week with the parable of the 10 bridesmaids has this in common. There are some people who end up being shut out of where they think they should be. They're out in the cold, as it were. Well, this story follows straight on from the one from last Sunday, which tells us to always be ready for the return of the Master. We don't know when he's going to return. So we need to be acting and ready as if he was going to return tomorrow. Be found ready. Be found on the job. Today's parable tells us that we've got to be doing something while we wait. And it doesn't matter what we've been entrusted with, how much, we need to use it so that we can present the master with a return when he comes back. So let's look now at verse 14. For the kingdom of heaven is as if a man going on a journey summons his slaves and entrusts his property to them. Now, the word for a journey, it means overseas. It means to another country. And if you were in that part of the world and travelling overseas, boy, you were going a very long way indeed. And your journey, your trip away could well take years. And because there's no means of communication easily from one country to another, those left behind do not know when the master will come back. And so, in the ancient world, with the slave economy, if you like, there were certain slaves who would be entrusted with real responsibility. And so 3 people have been entrusted with the master's assets. It's capital that we're talking about. Verse 15, he gave to one 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his ability. Now, the word for translated as talents in English is in Greek talanton. And a talanton or talanta is a unit of weight. It measures mass. It's nothing to do with being talented or having a particular ability. It's an unfortunate problem with the English language. So they've been given money, basically, a certain weight's worth of money, according to their respective ability to manage it, to invest it. So this is capital that needs to be used, and a return will be expected on the master's coming back. And so then he goes away, and we don't know how long he will take. So, verse 16, we see that they've responded differently to what's been entrusted to them. The one who'd received the 5 went off at once and traded with them and made 5 more talents. Now, the word traded really means to do business. It doesn't necessarily mean putting it on a risky commodities market or something, some strange derivatives and risk it all overnight. No, to do business where you can expect to get a decent return. It doesn't imply a lack of prudence. And so he doubled his money. Then in the same way, the one with the 2 talents also doubled the money as well. But the 1 talent guy was afraid, not willing to take a risk, dug a hole in the ground. There's no sort of safe place in the ancient world to deposit money, or, a hole in the ground was as good as any place to put your money, so that a robber who came into your house wouldn't find it, and so it should be safe there. And so he thought he was doing the right thing. Well, of course, we get to the point of the parable. The master comes back after a long time. And this is Jesus' way of telling his disciples that, his return to the earth again as the conquering Messiah in glory could well be delayed a very long time. You don't know when he's going to return. And so he comes back and wants to know what they've done with the capital he entrusted with them. And so, as the way parable structure works, you start with the one with the most, the 5, and he presents 5 more and is commended. Well done, good and trustworthy slave. You've been trustworthy in a few things. I'll put you in charge of many things. Enter into the joy of your master. Now, the phrase enter into the joy of your master in verse 21 is reminiscent of the previous parable of the wedding feast, where 5 of the bridesmaids were allowed into the bridegroom's house to enter into the joy of the wedding feast. it's the same thing that's going on here. Enter into the wonderful, completed kingdom of heaven on earth that will be rolled out when Jesus returns. And likewise, the one with the two has the same response, even though he's not returned as much percentage-wise, it's just as good a return. And so he too enters into the joy of the master. In parable structure, there's often three, aren't there? You know, there's three, and the middle one is just padding. It's the one, it's the last one that you really want to pay attention to see what Jesus might be trying to say. So we come to verse 24, the real focus of this story. It's the one talent guy. The one talent guy. The guy with the least and the least able. And perhaps for a lot of us, that might be the person that we can identify with. You know, we might feel that we're less able than many others around us, or we don't have much in the way of money. We're the humble person. So here, this is our guy. Let's look and see what Jesus might have to say to the likes of us. Well, let's just get really clear in our minds about what one talent is actually worth. Anybody got an idea, without looking up your notes, you know, and spoiling it for me, anyone know what a talent actually might weigh as a unit of mass, measuring mass? Anyone got an idea? You want to just throw it out there. Anyone? 100 nuggets of gold. Okay, interesting. You know, when you look at some of the religious art, I love looking at art history, religious art history. You see people with, you know, a few coins in their hand, or a nice little bag of gold or silver or something being handed over. Well, look, that stone is actually a talent, and there's a little bit of variation in the ancient world, different countries, but a commonly accepted value would be 35 kilograms. 35, I mean, that's half a person, you know, 35 kilograms. That's a lot. And so if you can imagine a set of scales, you see, this is how they work with scales. They have set weights, and you pour onto the other side of the scale the amount of coin, whether silver or gold or bronze, whatever, you know, so that you got the right amount. You had been measured out 1 talent of whatever it was. Now, in terms of Jewish denominations of coins and money, the talent was the largest unit, and it was equal to 6,000 denarii. Now, the denarius, we know from other stories in the Gospels, can be used as the amount that you would pay a labourer for 1 day's work. 1 day's work. So if we said that a labourer would maybe earn $40,000 a year, we're talking $650,000 if the talent was weighed out in silver. If it was gold, we're talking 20 million New Zealand dollars. You're beginning to get the picture here, folks. This is no small amount and no small responsibility entrusted to the least able of those 3 servants. So, when this 1 talent guy sees the others showing 100% return and giving it back to the master, what's he going to start to feel like? And so, this is his excuse. I knew that you were a harsh man, reaping where you did not sow, gathering where you did not scatter seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, have what is yours. Did not go down well. You wicked and lazy slave, you knew, did you, that I reap where I did not sow and gather where I did not scatter. Verse 27, then you ought to have invested my money with the bankers, and on my return I would have received what was mine with interest. This picture, this gives us a little bit of an idea into the economy, if you like, of the kingdom of heaven, how wealth and money kind of works, some principles there. It's interesting where it says the bankers. The bankers really were money changers because good Jews weren't allowed to charge interest. That was prohibited in Torah. But money could be exchanged from different currencies, and a commission would be earned on exchanging your money. You know, if you travel overseas, you know, you always get ripped off by the exchange process, don't you? Yeah. And so these bankers were the money changers, and what would happen is people who had money to invest would lend their money to the money changers, and they would get interest from their loan. That's not breaking the law, apparently. And so the money changers would give interest. The word interest is an interesting one. It's tokos, T-O-K-O-S, which means the child of. The child of. And it's used in other ways too. Jesus is regarded in Greek theology as Theotokos, the child of God. And so interest is the child of capital. And it's within the kingdom economy, capital is meant to grow. It's just set up to grow and for wealth to increase. There's no zero-sum game in terms of economics in the kingdom of heaven. That is, if you've got more, that means someone else is having less. No, there's continual growth and prosperity in the economy of the kingdom of heaven. And so, that capital is taken from the one who did not take any risks and is given to the one with the greatest ability. And isn't this something that we see in life? The rich somehow seem to get richer, and the poor stay poor. There's just something about that, isn't there? That's how that works. Now, that's not necessarily that there be any poor within the kingdom of heaven. But it's that those who have proven themselves trustworthy with a few, with a little, are entrusted with more. Because the master wants to see a return. There's a similar parable to this in Luke's Gospel. It's not the same parable, but there are some similar elements in chapter 19 where 10 slaves are entrusted each with the same amount, a menas, nowhere near as much as a talent. And they each return different amounts, and the one that returns the greatest amount, that multiplies it by 10 on the return of the master, is greatly rewarded and is put in charge, in verse 17, well done, take charge of 10 cities. 10 cities. And for the follower of Jesus, to whom this parable has been given by Jesus, remember they're overlooking them. They're on the Mount of Olives looking down on the temple. It's saying that when I return, you're going to have responsibilities in the kingdom. You're going to be ruling and reigning with me. And those who prove themselves faithful in this life, this test of life, are going to be rewarded with a greater or lesser degrees of responsibility in the next life when Jesus returns. Now that might sound a little bit tiring. You might actually like just to have a rest. But what we do with what we've been entrusted with now will influence what we will be doing when Jesus returns. So then, verse 30, we come to the scary part of this parable. It's another one of those ones that gives us pause, lest we think we can just go on cruise control in our Christian life, knowing that we've been forgiven and saved, and that we can just cruise to until the time that Jesus comes. As for this worthless slave, throw him in the outer darkness, like the bridesmaids excluded, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The scary warning to take heed of. Now, how can we sort of sum this up? Like many parables, it's pretty hard to exhaust it of meaning. But here are some things that stand out to me. Firstly, is that we have actually been entrusted with much. Even just one talent is a huge amount of the master's resource. It's not nothing, is it? In terms of what we've been entrusted with, the most precious thing we have is the good news of Jesus, that God has come in Jesus and is reconciling us to himself. That's the most precious thing we have, and that is to be used, not to just be sitting on a shelf somewhere. We've been entrusted with that. You know what we've been entrusted with, we did nothing to earn. It's entirely a gift. And we do not own what we have been entrusted with. This capital was the master's property from beginning to end. It wasn't given, it was entrusted. This is the ultimate stewardship parable, if you like, about our lives, who we are. What we have has been given on trust for the interests of the Master Jesus. It's not ours. So whatever we have, whatever we're carefully guarding in terms of our time, our abilities, our capital, our income, we need to be reminded that it's actually not ours. It's been simply entrusted to us. And so the master needs a reward, a return. And so the next point is that we should not compare ourselves with others. You know, at the beginning of the parable, the 10 talent, the 5, 2, and the 1 talent people, they were each entrusted with something. Yes, their different abilities were recognised. And that's just the way it is. They were given those abilities. It's not a judgment on them as people. Some people just simply have more capacity in certain areas. Yeah, and we're gifted differently. So we should not be comparing ourselves with others. The 2 talent person performed just as well as the 5 talent person and was commended in the same way and received the same reward. So, you know, if you're one of these people that sort of looks at other talented people, and let's use the word in that other sense, and you compare yourself or put yourself down, don't do that. Just stop doing that. Keep on working with what you've been given. Bernard, look, here's Bernard here. You know, he's aged about 134, and he's still using what the Lord has given him for and producing things for the Master. Everything you've got, I see, Bernard, everything about your life is for the Master's interests, and I honour you for that. So keep going, Bernard. The Master's not back yet. All right. Now, the next thing, and maybe this is the biggest lesson of this parable, is that to please the Master, you have to take a risk. I think that's what this parable is teaching us more than anything else. It's laid out very plainly in the Bible, Hebrews 11, verse 6, without faith it is impossible to please God. It is impossible to please God. And faith is really just another word for risk. When you're not certain, but you decide to do it anyway, to believe anyway. When you're wondering maybe it's the wrong thing to do, or maybe I might fail, you take that step anyway. So many of us are so naturally afraid to take risks. Some people are great risk takers. I'm probably one of them, but most people aren't. Many people are afraid to get it wrong, or you're afraid of complications that will come. You kind of know it's a good thing to do, but you're worried about the complications, or you're afraid of discomfort, what it might mean in your life. God requires us to take risk with what we have been given. Without risk, there's no return. In my last position, Vicar of Rangiora, we spent a little bit of time looking at our land and our assets, and we came up with a plan called Building Our Future, which would have involved the building of a beautiful complex of 14 townhouses on what was the vicarage property in the centre of town, with a shortage of accommodation and almost nothing of that nature, and at a time where people were flocking to downsize and get places in retirement communities and all of that. And it would have also have financed the complete rebuilding and reconstruction of a new hall and a new vicarage. It was a brilliant plan. The parish was completely on board with it. And it would have just set the whole parish up to a new level financially. The church property trustees wouldn't take the risk. And now 3 years later, 3.5 years later, you just look at what's going on in that town. It would have just rocketed. And there you go. Opportunity lost. So there's no reward without a risk. And finally, we can take home from this that we've got to use it or lose it. Because if you're not producing a good return with the master's assets, well, then he can easily get someone else who will. And I see this in churches, actually. You know, I can see churches that have just run themselves down over generations and may have, you know, a lot of wealth and assets and buildings, and then the new church that starts up and eventually sucks up a lot of the people and the assets, and people are coming to faith. And God is not afraid of transferring resources to where there is a fruitful ministry going on, where churches are taking risks. Now, as a church, as a small church and a new church, maybe we want to think of ourselves as a one-talent operation. We're small, but we have got great wealth of the gospel we've been entrusted with and the people that we have. Great assets, and we can use them to enlarge the kingdom for the Master, the Lord Jesus. We can't just cruise as individuals or as a church, just maintaining belief and not much more until Jesus' return. The unfortunate ending of this parable reminds us that we need to take a risk to be faithful. And so now, let's ask the Holy Spirit to speak to us, to speak to each of us about what we've been given. And yes, that's money, it's assets, it's our abilities, our experience, and it's our time. It's the complete stewardship package. And so let us pray.